Hey everybody, this is Jay, and I'm here to introduce you to a off-grid mesh networking project that we've been working at. The primary focus has been, or at least currently is, around making man-portable mesh network for IP connectivity, and to do it in an affordable way. I think there are a lot of radios and options out there to do this, but they're not cost-effective. This top radio up here, this is the Swiss Army knife from Ubiquiti or Unify. That is gonna set you back about $90. Now, it's missing a few pieces, and we'll chat about that here. And then this radio here, this is the AC mesh. This AC mesh radio will set you back about $100. You can actually have it a little bit cheaper if you buy a multi-pack and you don't want the power over Ethernet adapters. This guy gets expensive. It does not come with a power over Ethernet adapter, and it does not come with antennas. You can add external antennas onto the top of this, if you look right here, but you got to pay extra. So you're looking at spending a bit more money here to make this work. I believe this has a little bit better throughput, and I actually like the form factor, but it requires 48 volt active power over Ethernet, and that may not be as easy as as running this guy over here. This one right here, this will get you passive power over Ethernet, and it'll run at 24 volts, and you can actually push it and run it at 20 volts, which is a much happier number going forward. So first I'll talk a little bit about our use cases. Primary use case we're looking for right now is ATAK, or CivTAK specifically. It's not an exclusive, it has to be CivTAK on this or anything like that, or ATAK or anything. It's much more of it's a great test bed. It does voice, it does data, it does video. You can configure all sorts of stuff. It scratches an itch to just play around with it from an emergency response perspective that I have. But there's nothing to say you couldn't do anything IP related over this. It just needs to be decentralized, and ATAK can do decentralized multicast and broadcast communication, so hey, that's a great starting point. Configuration of this radio. First of all, let's talk about how we configure the software on this radio, really high level. We'll get more into it later, as what's on here right now is, well, actually this is Radio 4. This has the default vendor manufacturer's firmware on it, so this is running manufacturer's firmware. But the general the other units in the mesh, what are they running, and how are we configuring that? And then we'll talk about how the heck do you power these things, because these weren't made to be running around, strapped to backpacks or strapped to a the roof of your car or on a side-by-side or something when you're in an emergency response situation. So they were very much they're built to be generally affixed and somewhat permanently mounted. So we'll talk about that as how we power those as well. But first of all, software on these originally, actually the original firmware is based on a piece of software called OpenWRT. I won't get into the history of it. Wikipedia and the internet can solve that for you, but no, should be no surprise. It's no surprise. It's a open source project, and cool. Well, let's go ahead and not rock the boat here and make sure we'll base this on OpenWRT as well, as we know it's supported. The version we're on, a bit newer, and the sort of proof of concept or minimal viable product that we have running on here is it's an interesting way for those who are kind of familiar with ham radio or commercial radio, which a lot of people in this space I assume will be. But if not, hey, that's fine. I'll do my best to explain this. I look at it as ham radios want front programming, front panel programming on their radios, and commercial users they want to adjust volumes and change channels of their radios as they use them. We're taking much more of that commercial approach, right? Very much simple for an end user to use. They don't need to know all the bells and whistles. So we want to make this you program it in the office and you deploy it in the field, and you tweak some settings in the field, power settings. These units, being AC, if you're not familiar with them, support both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz at the same time. Or you can use one or the other. You have a lot of flexibility there. I think in my mind, the only downside to this radio is the enclosure's plastic and not metal. And It doesn't have a USB port. I would love a USB port on this for flexibility and loading configuration and those sorts of things. But hey, you can't, when you're going with COTS solutions coming off the shelf, you can't have everything. So, getting back to the software view of this, right now the Office programming is a kind of cumbersome process. You edit some config files, you build a new firmware, and you flash the firmware, right? You're not flashing the configuration or pushing the configuration to it. So I need to streamline that process, as it's got a heavy barrier to entry. But if you're on the other side of that and you're deploying this in the field, you can press the reset button, get into config mode, and in config mode of this radio, you can choose if the radios are on or off, what their power is set to, and a couple other details currently. There is some functionality lacking in the current setup, in the current firmware that we have built on this. There's no IP address management at a radio level, so we've got to solve that so you don't have to statically configure your devices. That's a fancy way of saying make that IP address management more plug and play. You don't have to think about it. No one has to think about it. And then the other piece on it is service discovery, and we need probably a better way to like if you plug a camera into the, plug an Ethernet switch into this, plug a camera and plug a computer into it, how does the computer find the camera? Or, how does the computer find the software-defined radio that's networked plugged into this? Any of that sort of stuff. So there's some details, but from a proof of concept standpoint, like, it's not hard to statically configure that stuff and make it work. So we're pretty happy there, and that will be next steps. Now, what we haven't done yet is range testing. Range testing is still needs to be done, and I think being that it's I'm Tuesday, December 3rd right now, I've got work travel and holiday travel coming up. I don't anticipate getting a lot of time to test that, and if I can chuck it in a checked bag and do some work in it while I'm traveling, hey, that's great. So that kind of covers the radio for the most part, and there's a lot of options in this. I don't know if I said this, but this meshes using 802.11s, which is a standard meshing protocol. We're also using Batman, which is another layer 2 meshing protocol on top of it, so that you could take a radio from one mesh and a radio from another mesh and plug them in back to back and build a more super mesh, if you will, and all sorts of iterations and configurations are sort of in scope for what we're doing in between. But what's cool is you can configure these radios to do mesh and access point mode at the same exact time, so you could have one of these devices, say, strapped to your side-by-side and 3 or 4 folks sitting around it using their devices directly attached to it as well. And you can choose if you want, the 2.4 band, the 5 band, both. There's a lot of flexibility where, I've seen some other options. There's for those ham folks, there's an Arden configuration I've seen out there that, it's a 5 gigahertz radio. One, you can't find it anywhere, and 2, it's only 5 gigahertz, and I don't believe you can run it in a hybrid access point and mesh way. So this gets you a lot of flexibility for not a lot of money. So I'm really, really happy with the unit for what we're doing in the experimentation. And cost is pretty good. There may be a cheaper TP-Link model that's similar to this that we're investigating, but it could run you as cheap as $70, and I've seen some refurb ones for $60 out there, so that really brings your price down, because if you compare something like this, right, for those who know Meshtastic, right, this unit, these go for, 40-ish bucks, shipping and handling, all that jazz, like, you're starting to plug the gap. Will this go as far as Meshtastic? No, but Meshtastic and 900 megahertz can't do voice, can't do video, so it's those trade-offs of what is your use case. Now, let's get into powering this. Powering this is something I saw. There's someone had a similar setup to what we have here for Arden, like I was mentioned earlier, and it's based on a USB power bank. But I don't know about you, but I don't have a ton of USB power banks. If you want to run off grid for a couple days, or whatever, like charging them and rotating them and making sure you have a bunch of them just for that, well, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. It's a viable option. I've got a working prototype around that here if folks are interested. Gladly share out what that looks like. But for me, I looked around, what do I have? What's very common man? What's a very, poor man, if you will, right? And, I'm a homeowner, so I have power tools, and, I have an electric an electric weed whacker, or string trimmer and edger, and I've got drills and I've got sanders and I've got the plethora of stuff from projects around the house and just life. So I said, let's roll with that, and that is what we did. So let me walk you through our setup here, of what this looks like. So let's get this out of the way, and this is I would say the first prototype, this first iteration of what we have here, right? We've got our radio, we've got our phone connected over Ethernet. We have our radio, and you can see here it's up and running. Blue light's on. Great. Well, let's open up and see what's in here. Like I said, right, we're running this off Power Tools. I'm a Teal guy, so I'm Makita. I have this Makita basic 5 amp hour battery, which I can get about 24-hour runtime on. That might not be with the phone, so don't quote me on that completely. But I know the radio alone, I was getting about 24-hour runtime, which is pretty good. So now that I've just unplugged this and turned the radio off, and you can see battery 11, right? I got a bunch of these, but this doohickey right here, you're probably saying, what is this? It's not a Makita sanctioned product. You are correct. This is actually a Power Wheels adapter, of all things, to take your kid's Power Wheel and give it a little bit more jam. So what that gives us is a nice, reasonably nice, prefabricated sled. This I think I paid about 15 bucks for. There are cheaper ones. For some reason, I wanted to go with this fancier one. Not clear why, but there are cheaper options. All right. Now, the radio itself will run off this for about 50% discharge of the battery, and then it cuts out because voltage drops too far, drops below that 19 volt cutoff. So what we do is we've added ourselves a boost converter here to get us 24 volts constant. Had really good luck with this. Sorry for the wiring mess. I either need to heat shrink this all together or print up some PCBs with some fuses and make this very much a, solder on some stuff, put it in an enclosure and call it good. Like I said, this is just purely testing. It won't take much to clean this up. I'm going to order some wire loom and probably some other stuff to make it good enough for now. Right, we got Wago connectors on here. Like if you're prototyping this stuff, this is great. It's way better than wire nuts or twisting in an electrical tape. So this is perfectly fine for all things. So out of here, we've got power going to our power over Ethernet, our passive power Ethernet injector, and to keep the phone charged, which I would say this is probably optional. Got a USB-C 5 volt quick charge 3.0, like basically 12 and 24 volts up to, down rather, down to 5 volts, so I can keep my phone topped off and running. And I can pretty much get the whole battery out of this. Now, all these bits and bobs here, and I can list them out below for y'all to link to and check them out. I want to say this was collectively less than $100, maybe 70 bucks. I already had a Ethernet adapter floating around, and I already had a USB-C extension cable for other stuff. So between all of this, right, you're in, especially if you already have batteries and a whole stable of batteries, like again, this is number 11. I think I have 12 total. Oops. You're looking at like less than, say 200 bucks for this setup. I assume a lot of us already have phones. I had to buy an Android phone for this because I am not an Android person, but all in all, like this is much more approachable than, a $1,500 unit, or a $15,000 unit, depending on what you're looking at out there. So, my goal again is to, I wanted to come in under $300, and now I really actually want to see if I can drive this down to $150. So the TP-Link radio rather than the Unify radio, that's probably going to do it. In terms of price-wise, I'd love to, if you were to use, instead of this setup and you had some power banks and you wanted to go that route, like you could probably pull this off for about $100. So I think the next thing to do is figure out range testing and then look at what are my options for higher gain antennas and maybe some amplifiers as part of that. And again, continuing to harden the software on the unit and get it so it's a little bit like, office level or office level programming and the field level programming is much more intuitive. So, again, first iteration, if you're interested in me walking through some of the software stuff, how that was built, let me know in the comments below, or, go ahead and, reach out. I think, I'm still setting up a website to document this and take pictures and put links. So once that's together, hit the contact form now. But now, yeah, leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are on this, and we'll go from there. Man, cheers, everybody.